Everyone please rise, face to the west. We'll take the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start with the roll call directly to my right. Barbara here.
Austin here.
Mater here. Quorum's present. Moving into the consent agenda. All matters listed within the consent agenda have been distributed to each member of the Planning Commission for study. These items are considered to be routine and will be enacted upon by one motion with no separate discussion. When a separate discussion is desired on an item from either the Planning Commission or from the floor, that item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. Is there any item any member of the commission would like to have removed from the consent agenda? Any item any member of the public would like to have removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I entertain a motion on this item.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
We have a motion made by Barber with a second by Leimer that we approve the consent agenda as read. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries with all in favor. Moving down to discussion items. No action will be taken this evening. This is for discussion only. Land Development Code. Discuss Article 6, Special Districts, Article 11, Supplemental Use Standards, definitions, and any other comments on the draft Land Development Code. Good evening, our consultant Chris.
Good evening. So I have a typo on the title slide, so great to start, but Articles 2, 6, and 11, not 2, 5, and 11, they have there. So just to reorient us, since we're coming down the home stretch on these initial reviews and prior to seeing it all in one complete part, on the right is how we reorganized the code. On the left are all your existing sections that we're working in. We spent a lot of time on a lot of the substantive articles on how the development comes together, and so these last few are sort of the ones that we leave to the end for several reasons, but so dealing with 2, 6, and 11, basically definitions, the special districts, and then supplemental standards. And I'll walk through each of those real quick. You have a draft there, and you might have heard Kelly and I talking. We've been on the phone with both Michelle and Kelly early this week, getting all the other articles refined based on your comments from the last 2 or 3 meetings. And so that is making some of the things in this article, these articles shift. So you have a draft in front of you, but we're making changes to some of those things as we speak to make the whole code kind of work together. But basically definitions, this definition section is a lot smaller than your current one, and that's for a number of reasons. One, we try to take a plain language style of writing to the whole thing so that the customary dictionary meaning controls in all cases, and so we don't have to spend too much time defining things. So that's our first thing of trying to parse the code out and make it user-friendly. Second, we have the interpretation of measurements section in Article 1, so that's all the things on how do you measure a lot, how do you measure sign size, how do you measure building height. And so none of those words are necessarily defined. That section in Article 1 is talking about how we interpret the dimensions and measurements and things like that. So that also removes the need for defining things. Description of uses of land and buildings, so the use table that we spent a lot of time on 2 or 3 meetings ago, and all those uses, whether accessory or principal, those are all being removed from the definition section too, because there's going to be descriptions of those uses going along with that use table. There's also an intro to that use table saying that, how do we interpret uses? We don't want to define uses, because then when you define it, it's that or it's nothing. And so what we're trying to do is make a subtle difference that while we're offering description of uses, so when something new comes along that has this same scale, similar impact, but maybe is not quite that use, then you can interpret it as being that use. So that's just a subtle difference. So all the uses are taken out of the definition section. We're trying not to regulate in the definition section, so have it just be terminology. Removing circular definitions, things that we found that either weren't used in the code or were used only to, in another definition. We're trying to get those out of there, and we don't want to make a definition that causes us to have to define 3 more terms, and so we're trying to remove those things. And that leaves us with defining only the terms of art or ambiguous terms. And so you have a running list in front of you of the things that were mostly in your existing code, some that we came across for things we've added in, and we've got a few things that we're keeping track of to add to that definition section as well. I'll just go through these and then we can circle back and discuss any of them that you want. Special districts. So these are the things that when we took our approach at how to refine and consolidate and streamline the existing districts over these districts that we knew we were going to have to work in a special case that were unlike the conventional districts. And the first one is for planned development, and that one we're taking a new approach. You currently had 4 different planned districts in the code. You had a planned district for residential, planned district for commercial, planned district for industrial, and then a PUD ordinance, planned unit development. And they were all really kind of trying to do the same thing, and that's add flexibilities to something that doesn't meet the standard, but it's a good project and give you like discretion to approve those. But they were all kind of used as the what we call the standardless district. It becomes, well, show us what you got, and if we approve it, then it's a planned district, and we'll approve it. So we're trying to get a new approach to that really deals with developments that's planned on a larger scale. So this combines with what we reviewed in Article 3 on the plan development procedure, where we'll have someone present a preliminary development plan, a final development plan, and basically the way we would like it to work, that someone can assemble parcels that meet all or most of the standards of all the districts, so all the building type standards, frontage type, open space standards that we've talked about. Anytime someone wants to assemble those differently than is allowed in the base districts, we use this plan development and plan district process. So an easy way to think of it is that and it's kind of what you have in your current planned commercial, planned residential, and planned industrial, is that any of those districts can become planned districts, but we put the emphasis on the process to arrive at that development plan, and tied it back to some intent statements for all the development standards, and to really make them do a plan that identifies where they're not meeting your base standards, justify why, and kind of document it based on the bigger picture. The other thing we're trying to get out of is using this on basically a site scale development. So if someone does a site plan and simply doesn't want to meet the standard for some reason or other, we don't want them using the planned district approach, because that kind of becomes an end run around any other flexibility you have built in. Related to that, if someone does want to flexibility or deviations at the site level, there's the variance process, and that's, has its difficult thresholds for reasons that they aren't just granted routinely. But then in the site plan review, if you remember, we discussed breaking that up into the site plan and design review that you all see, but then also the administrative site plans, things are just routine building permits that you don't see. And so we've built some administrative flexibility for you to grant deviations from that. A good example would be the CVS application that you had a few weeks ago, where they weren't meeting some of the standards, and I think they might have gone to a planned district because of it, or whether they, so that would be one where we would suggest don't use the planned district. We've built in mechanisms in the site plan review process for you to approve things that are different from the base standard. When we're doing that and not using the variance process, so it's always important for us to add criteria. So Article 3 in the site planning has criteria for you to review and approve those. So that's kind of a long-winded way of explaining our different approach. We really want the plan development process to be planning on a larger scale, where you're altering how buildings and development relate to the streets and open spaces, and therefore you need flexibility, or when you're doing something that's really unique to a particular land area that you're dealing with, and you need to do something to take advantage of that. Next one down, Urban Corridor Overlay District, that one is an existing district. We simply reformatted it to fit in, reformatted the existing standards to fit into this new format of the regulations, and then made some cross references to the building types and frontage types that we've allowed, because that district is currently based on a corridor plan that you have that goes down each of those stretches. At the staff level, we had discussions of, well, is that plan and is that overlay district even still valid? And so we were looking at that, and there's perhaps a thought that that district could go away because the base districts would be doing everything that that corridor plan was trying to do with the building types and frontage types that we built in. The third one, the MP district, this is the one where we combined, you had mobile home park and mobile home subdivision, and those two districts, and really the only difference between those zoning districts was that one was designed so that the individual units could be platted and owned if they met all the standards for getting utilities and infrastructure to each of those separate home sites. And so we ended up combining those into a single district, and it didn't really fit well in the base districts because it wasn't using building types and frontage types. It was really based on its own kind of site development plan, so we combined them there. And we did improve some of the planning standards by relating some of the things that would go into one of those developments in a mobile home park into more community amenities within it, borrowing from some of the open and civic space types that we have in the code. And then the other thing we added to was in the planning profession, there's this kind of movement for tiny homes, and you think of it as sort of, it's sort of one of those buzz terms and jargon, and you're like, well, are people really doing it? It's on HGTV all the time, and you're like, well, but I actually saw a newspaper article, there is one in our metro area that was done for veterans, and it was a pretty cool project. And so we started thinking of it, and we're like, well, those types of projects are exactly the same as manufactured home or mobile home parks, and so why wouldn't we enable them through the same mechanism? And so we do allow that through this. You can do what we call the micro or small home sites on these just as well, and the lot standards would just be different because you wouldn't have to fit the elongated trailer. You can structure it to fit your project. So it seemed like a very easy fit because it's virtually the same thing in terms of impact on surrounding areas, pattern, scale, intensity, and so that expands the use of this district for any kind of small home site planning projects. The fourth one down, the Industrial Park Overlay District. This is an existing district that applies to the property just to the north and east of Moonlight in sort of an odd configuration there. There's a street, and so that's the only place in the city it's applied, yet it has a lot of standards associated with it and site standards. So we didn't really do anything to revisit those because we hadn't planned, and there wasn't enough planning in a further detail to go, well, are these standards valid or not? So we kind of tried to just keep that intact. So that really is reformatted to everything that's in your code right now, just meeting our heading and subheading structure. There was also discussion of could that one go away with our new emphasis on frontage types, building types, and open space types, and possibly it could. I think it's a map district now, so we were looking at, well, what would we do to make it go away, and would just regular M1 or C3 with some design standards on it serve the same purpose, and it may. So we're kind of taking a look at that as well. The last one is the most difficult one, the Industrial Airport Overlay District. When we went in, all throughout the project, our thought was, okay, we aren't going into enough detail to understand the nuances of all the things that go along with airport overlay zoning. We haven't necessarily heard any problems with the existing zoning. Your plan mentioned that multimodal transportation in the airports are an asset, and to strengthen those. So our thought all along was, well, we won't touch the airport overlay zoning district because it doesn't really relate to a lot of the topics we've been addressing through the whole code update. But we'll do the same as we did with those other districts. We'll integrate it into this code so it works well. When we started to look at it more and more, it doesn't integrate into your existing code very well. It refers to a lot of things that are county related and not city related, so there's some really difficult fits, and so we had a hard time fitting that in to this code structure. So our two thoughts right now, and the way we have it formatted right now is, one, we wouldn't touch it and we would just adopt it as an appendix and leave it in its current form. And we would comb through it for anything in your current, in the proposed new ordinance that wouldn't make sense, and we just substitute it in the terminology. So that's one option. The other option in talking with staff is that if this is a county-held ordinance, that we can simply, in Article 6, designate the area to which it applies. It's a defined area. Recognize that additional height setback restrictions may apply to properties in those areas, and then defer to the county for administering it. So we're kind of looking into that option as well, but it will be one of the two, and we'd be happy to discuss any of them in more detail. But that section is pretty, like I said, it doesn't any of the difficult fits into this structure are already existing as difficult fits in your current ordinance, because there's so much, it almost looks like it was a county model that was just simply adopted without paying any attention to the city's zoning ordinance. The last article you have is the supplemental standards, and big fanfare for very few pages. So these types of articles are usually saved for those topics that define any particular zoning district boundary, kind of special topic ordinances. So we kind of reserve them to the end because we catch all those things that we aren't catching in the base district standards. When we went to do that and went through all the uses and all the conditional uses and things, we realized the only things we really didn't catch were the wireless communication and wind energy. So these are there's standards that apply across a variety of different zoning districts, so that's why they're usually housed as one standalone ordinance. When we finish doing Article 11, basically just to walk through the substance of them first, and we can talk about the logistics and formatting of it. The wireless communication one it's your existing standards reformatted to fit this ordinance's format, so there should be no substantive changes there. The wind energy conversion system section is the same, except then when we did it, we recognized, well, maybe there's an opportunity for it was talking about all of the large scale wind energy conversion systems, and there are smaller scale systems that you start to see. In my one example has been that the A.L. Huber building that's on 435 near Nolan Road, between Nolan Road. They had a wind turbine on their property, and it's in a typical commercial area, and so, but it's a small one, and so your current ones were only allowed in yeah, the large ones were only in A and the industrial districts. And so we thought, well, the smaller scale ones maybe are appropriate in all of the districts. I did notice that the A.L. Huber one is no longer there, so I don't know if maybe they're not very practical and it was a kind of a gimmicky thing, but they are coming into existence more and more. And so we thought, well, let's add the small one in and then expand their applicability to other zoning districts. And through a conditional use, so it would be something that you would still get to review it and to make sure there's no adverse impacts on surrounding properties. And then with solar facilities, a similar thing. The ordinance has some provisions on roof-mounted solar systems, and so we simply designated those as an accessory use in all districts. And then the bulk of your standards, the existing standards, were for the ground-mounted ones, and they were currently allowed as conditional uses in the A and the industrial districts as well. And so we thought they might have some expanded applicability in the larger lot residential districts, because again, these are starting to, more and more they're starting to scale down where ground mounted ones could fit into those districts if you have large enough lot, large enough solar exposure. So again, since it's a conditional use and you'll get to review on a case by case basis, we thought we'd add those to those larger lot residential districts. So that's the end of the supplemental standards. When we finish, we're like, well, that's a really short article, and we spent a lot of time 2 or 3 meetings ago going through all the uses, and we kind of came to the question of why don't these just roll into Article 5? So all the uses in the use table are all done in one place, and these conditions that are on these 2 or 3 pages would simply be like they are with the other uses that you have special conditions for. And so we think that can happen, and then Article 11 goes away, and so unless there's any objections to that, we would probably add these uses to the use table. So the telecommunications facilities would be identified as a conditional use in the A, C3, M1, and M2 in the use table, and then these other, the energy systems one would be reflected similarly to they are here in the full expanded use table for all the zoning districts. And then these specific standards would be in those sections that we reviewed in detail with you a couple meetings ago. So that's it in a nutshell for these articles, and I'd be happy to go into anything in depth or any of the other things, other articles that we still need to discuss as well.
Staff would like to add before we discuss?
We've gone pretty in-depth over the definitions with them, and it's already resulted in one revised version. So I won't have a lot to say on those.
Okay.
We covered everything else.
What about the rest of the commissioners, anything on the definition section? Some very, very, I like the plain language.
They're easy to read, it's very, easy to understand.
On the definition of family, we're talking about a group of not more than 5 excluding servants living together. I assume that should say 5 unrelated people.
Yes, and that's one we actually are looking at tweaking or actually even removing, because when we were dealing with the use table in Article 5, all of the residential building types are based on, in the planning profession, we get used to saying single family, and that's what we mean. It's a family living in a house because that's the way it's always been. That definition becomes more and more strained the more you kind of whittle away at it for both legal reasons and practical reasons. So what we recognized was that, well, all of the building types are talking about a household. So a detached house is for a single household, a duplex is for 2 households, a row house is for up to 8 households. And so we said, well, why don't we define, instead of defining family, why don't we just define household? And so our latest definition does have that, and then you're correct that it's 1 or more persons who are related by blood living together, up to 5 who are not so related. And then for the R1 district specifically, we do have to carve out an exception for the up to 8 special needs or disabled, because that's by Kansas statute, that you can't, if they want to live in the same environment as a typical neighborhood detached home, they have the right to do that by statute. So we've carved that into the definition. Then we wouldn't really necessarily have to define family. The term single family, yeah, it's household, and it's anyone related by blood, marriage, or adoption, unlimited number, up to 5 not so related, and then we carve out that special statutory exception for up to 8 and their caregivers in the group home setting. That's also the reason why in the use table, the group home starting at 9 is a more limited use, because that one, you're not constrained by statute as much. There's a provision for those as well.
So along those lines then, under dwelling unit, you still reference single family?
Right.
So that would need.
That would change as well.
And then, under frontage, I didn't know, it doesn't take up much room, and it's not hard to read, but do we need the additional definitions of frontage building and frontage lot? I felt like they were covered by the definition.
Yeah, that's probably a good point. And that's also one where, when I was mentioning back with the definitions, that some of the things are going into interpretation of measurements in Article 1. There might be further justification for removing those, because Article 1 does talk about how the lot's configured in building frontage versus lot frontage, and so it probably can go away for that reason as well.
Under mobile home, second to the last line, shall not include any trailer, home, camp van, or vehicle. Trailer home stuck out at me as, well, I wrote down, what is this? I mean, I know what I think of when I hear the word trailer home, but it's actually, yeah, the term mobile home shall not include any trailer, home, camp van, and so when I hear trailer home, I think of mobile homes, based on just
Yeah, we,
what terminology was
a
not
vehicle,
but
right, so I guess a trailer.
I assume that's like a pull behind camper trailer. or
right,
something.
and that is one we talked about, the staff asked that same question of why are we doing it, so that's your, and the other thing we do have to be careful with on this one is there's some state and federal definitions in play that we need to check this against. That's your current definition, and everything we found was your current definition seemed to be okay with any state or federal issues. And not to say that we have to do everything the state or federal says about this, but HUD has some provisions on what counts and what doesn't count that we want to align with. My suspicion is that section, I think like we were all just thinking there, was put in to prevent these from being, basically, you could just drive away at any instant. And I think all of that can go away from the definition and not change anything, because in that MP district where we're enabling these, there are all the standards for when you have to put them on foundations and blocks and what needs to be done
Yeah.
to those homes so that they are a dwelling unit and not a vehicle. So we'll take a closer look at that on both counts, on the state and federal, and then those kind of can send you down an endless loop of expanded legalese and definitions that we don't want to go to. We want to arrive at the simplest thing that works for the city, but we'll take a look at that, and then also that last part for sure, that strikes me as nothing related to this. It strikes me as something related simply to the city's goal of not having them be able to be moved around at any instant, and that's probably already taken care of by the MP district.
Under parapet, needs the extension of main walls of the building with ornamental details above the roof level and design minimum extent to shield mechanical equipment. I guess my understanding of a parapet, it doesn't have to be ornamental and it doesn't have to shield mechanical equipment. It can just be an extension above the roof line.
That's probably a fair statement, yeah, I would agree with that, so we can.
But you want to make it just that it doesn't have to meet extra criteria? Or we're just bare?
Like straight,
bare bones?
ornamental detail part.
Yeah, just if we're
Like that.
defining a parapet, a parapet doesn't have to have ornamental details, so yeah, I would strike through that, and then it doesn't have to be designed to the minimum extent to shield mechanical equipment, if there's no mechanical equipment on the roof.
Yeah, and this term is, we did a term search for where we did and didn't use it, and so this term is used in two different places. It's in the design standards, where it would be, whether it is ornamental or not, would be taken care of there. And it's in the building height exceptions for things that can project above building heights, in which case, to your point, it may not be screening anything when it does that, and it may just be it may not, what details are on it, we don't know. So I think that's probably best to make it as bare bones as possible, and then let those places where it's used say whether it's screening or not.
I think one more quick one, understory. The very last part, the part of the building which is above the surface of a floor and the ceiling next above. For those instances where there's no floor above, should that be the roof next above? Because then the area between the ceiling and the roof would not be included in the story.
Yeah, this one we borrowed from a standard definition book and kind of tweaked it, and I think it should be ceiling because the way Story is measuring, it may not measure to the roof. It's being used to reduce the scale of the building height somewhat by measuring those internal spaces. And so half that space under the roof, if the top one just goes to the ceiling, that's the end of the story. The space under the roof is not necessarily a story if it's a pitched roof, but it could become a half story if there's a certain, so that's the definition below it, that at some point it's gonna count as a half story when you have X amount of space, and so let's deal with the roof pitch and structure. And so we have a couple of images that are gonna go along with this, and these are actually two that are gonna be moved to that interpretation, and they're gonna go with the building height section, so they won't necessarily be defined, they'll be explained as to how they regulate how you measure the height of a building. But I think it should be, I'll take a look at it, but I think it should be ceiling, because that top one, usually you're dealing with the spaces in there, you're looking for 8 to 12 feet. And then there might be, if it's 8, it could be 10 with the, stuff above the ceiling. So we're not necessarily trying to control those spaces that are non-occupiable.
Let's go with Article 2. Article 6. Staff have any input on Article 6 before we open this up for comments?
I think you covered all the thoughts we had beyond, as far as maybe eliminating some of them. If we're gonna keep them, then I'd have some comments. If we're not gonna keep them, I wouldn't have comments. But I don't really think, with all the design standards that we have and all the new format, most of it becomes unnecessary. And that the corridor, Chris had a very good idea on the corridor plan, is that, it goes all the way along 56 highway from border to border, and it's centered to Gardner Road from border to border. And there's just so many different things happening there that it would be a little more effective to, once we get this adopted, to go back and relook at those areas, area by area, different character areas along there, and then handle any kind of overlay we need based on those different character areas, and get a little more specific with it if we need it. Because it's really hard to have one district that's gonna cover everything for that much area.
Oh, I agree.
And that plan actually does a real good job of explaining the transitions and context as you come through from, highway interchange, as automobile oriented as it gets, to kind of in-town, car oriented stuff, to your downtown, people oriented stuff. So there's literally those 3 distinct environments across that whole large area as well. So the plan carves those out. The standards don't necessarily back that up as easily. They just kind of go, parking in back and all that kind of stuff. So we were talking about, like, every location may not be appropriate for that. So I think going through and using the frontage types and building types to go what makes sense in each environment, you might be able to either come up with a plan district or an overlay, or even find that all of those standards kind of work well within there. But
I tend to agree. I know I made the comment on the industrial overlay district, that a lot of that stuff's already included in a lot of the other parts of the standard. The downtown one, the UCD, I think is, it did have some stuff in it that I don't remember seeing in other sections of the code, but I don't know that those are things that wouldn't be handled by the new building type approach and things of that nature. So I guess personally, I don't have a lot of heartburn or any heartburn if, like, UCD and iPod go away. And then the manufactured mobile home plan district, how is that different than 5.06.E, which is the non-planned mobile home?
right, that it's not that those those were those specific standards for that district. Yeah, they moved into
So they
here.
came out of 5 and went into here.
A lot of it came out of 5. Some of the stuff that wasn't in 5.06 as far as the planning of the district and setting it up, weren't in there, and so we moved it all to one spot. And so they'll go out of 5.06.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I did have a question on 603C1A. It's enforceable and fine as it is, I guess. It just seemed odd to me that we define a minimum area of 15 acres and a minimum street frontage of 300 feet. Except if you want one that's 5 acres and 150 feet, that's probably okay too.
Yeah, and that's a touche on that one. We talked about, your current standard is 15, and we were like, particularly talking about the tiny home development, we were like, well, you could do that on a lot smaller and do it well. And so we're trying to whittle that down. I mean, that's something we could, if we want to just not stick to your current standards and go, let's just allow, since we were grouping them with manufactured home parks and everything, we didn't want to take too many liberties and go, well, now all of a sudden you can do manufactured home parks everywhere, so we kind of towed the line on that one. But it's a good point. I mean, what we don't want to do is set you all up to get applications where someone's going, playing both sides of the fence, I guess.
This is not good.
We can take a look at, for the final public hearing draft, we can take a look at, maybe something that's a little more concrete and think about what, if there's any problems with going with just the lower standard altogether, or if there's a different way to parse out different scales of these types of communities as well, for minimum threshold.
I can only see the way it is. Anything else, Brad?
Nope.
Brad?
I did check with our building codes, people to make sure that under building design for the mobile home parks, that was all current to their understanding, and they said that was all good, so.
Great. All right, if we don't have anything else on 6?
The only other thought I had about the industrial park overlay district is, it really only applies to a few parcels right now, and 4 of them are vacant, but some of them are already developed. But if we do get to the point where we're expanding according to sub-area plans, would we expand this area? But I still think that most of the things are accomplished in the regular code.
Well, we can move on to Article 11. Staff have anything for to point out before we discuss?
I was wondering if the zoning districts where we allow the wireless communication antennas, there's 4 of them listed. I wondered if that's providing sufficient coverage within our community without somebody having to rezone, because I know they have to be a certain distance apart, and it seems to be getting closer and closer as the data usage goes up, and so I don't know if we really need to limit it that way, maybe.
That was one of my questions, because it's a special use permit anyway.
Right, so we'll see
Are
it.
those the right districts? Now,
Or do we
we probably need to have some mechanism in place to say they can't put it in certain places other than, they bring it to us for a special use permit, and we say, well, we don't like it next to those houses, so no.
Well,
Because let's see, the one that we saw right out here on the 183rd,
Yeah, it's
that was ag, right?
But I
I think
mean,
the current ones are probably ag.
it's gonna be limited a bit according to how far they have to be from anything else, so it's gonna have to be a pretty good sized lot if it's a very tall tower.
That's a good point.
So, we cover all that fall zone and everything in here already.
That's good.
I'm gonna jump in. Chris and I were having a conversation on the side. There are wireless telecommunication regulations, federal regulations. that come into play with all of these towers. We haven't had a new tower come in a long time. My concern is that, would it really matter if we outline zoning districts at all? If they come in with their site study and show that there's a void in the community, we would have to let them find a way anyway. So it may better serve the community that we allow these by conditional use permit in every district. That way we're not running into an issue where our code says no and their paperwork says yes, and we go.
That's three.
In regards to that also, we have had 2 inquiries this year for a new type of wireless system that is mounted on the existing light poles of your community with small cabinetries that are about 3 by 3 by 2. And they're basically a low-level antenna system meant to blanket your community. And these are being considered by Verizon's looking at one, AT&T is looking at one, and we know that Sprint also has one that's in another community. And Michelle's right, you can't deny them. This is one of the things by federal law, they've got certain rights, so it's better for us to be able to conditionally tell them where they can and can't go based on safety factors, considerations, line of sight, those kinds of things that are really problematic versus you just don't like the thought of that kind of a system. These are really more designed to be blending into your community. They're a little taller than a regular light pole, or they attach to the top of the light pole, but in some cases they look like the regular light shield that you see on some of the older style lamps, or they have different configurations based on the kind of radius that you're putting out. So I think it's to your advantage to do the conditional use.
Well, we did talk about those, and since they'd be in the right of way, this probably wouldn't apply. It would be more of a mechanism of council approving right-of-way permits and probably franchise agreements and things like that.
But they can also go on private property.
Right. You may see them on water towers. I know there's some in Olathe along Santa Fe.
I guess, another thought I had is the 160 feet limit, which is, that may also be a statutory thing, I'm not sure, but, that seems kind of, I know I thought if you go over 200 feet, then you have to put a light on top of them, and maybe we don't want to go that high, but it seems like all of us I've seen before are usually about 160 feet, but maybe not in the urban area.
Yeah, no, this, I was kind of making some notes of, it'd be very easy to take us, not very easy, nothing with cell towers is very easy, we got it better. But conceptually, it makes sense, that's a better way to say it, to take all of the districts and think of the context. So, you see, you're right that a lot of them exceed that height limit, but they're usually the lattice or guide towers where cellular communications are on them. The ones that are purely monopoles built specifically for telecommunication are often, that's actually probably quite high for those. They're often in the anywhere from the 80 to 120 range, and you'll see either 3 to 4 providers, and they're usually at levels that are 12 to 15 feet apart or more. And so everyone rushes to get in at the, you get lower coverage if you're at the 70-foot level, and so. So those exist in that context, but then if you get into more of the pedestrian scale context, then it makes sense to, let's require stealthing of the tower, or let's require the on-building facilities, the rooftop facilities, any building over 4 stories usually are pretty ripe for putting them on rooftops where you don't even see them at all, and those can actually be quite lucrative for a building owner. So we could, to the extent in your downtown that you'd have any of those buildings in the future, we could start to say, either in downtown, they either need to be stealth or on building. And then you kind of start to get at least some guidance for what you would look for in the conditional review process on the type of tower, the design for that context, and we could probably draw a simple diagram of that up. And that might let us take that 160 and parse it out per district. And then even to Larry's point, these really small ones, which, the right-of-way ones are one thing, but to the extent they're going on, private property, some of the ones we've seen do look a little bit funny, you know, a light pole in a parking lot that's all of a sudden got like a 20-foot extension on it that look a little bit weird. But we can put a different provision in for those. The kind of, we do on-call planning for the city of Prairie Village, and they've run into this issue as well as a lot of the Johnson County communities have. And we met with one of the providers that was proposing the on light tower one on the street lights, and the scary thing was he showed us a diagram of the data usage that they're going through, and he said, well, it's basically exponential. So the thought was, well, these smaller scale ones are going to carry all our needs, and he was kind of, no, the smaller scale ones are merely to get data off the existing towers. So we still need all those existing towers and then some. So, and he basically said it's people that are figuring out everything. So it's like people like me, the Neanderthals of telecommunications stuff, are starting to go, oh, I can get information here, and finally figure it out, and the data usage is just exploding. So that's a long-winded way of saying we can make some of those fixes to make it more comprehensive. I think the reality is maybe a bare bones approach as well, and it is good, and you do if we can give you enough guidance to do kind of a case by case. This is one of those areas where we're going to move it to Article 6 and have some basic conditions. I could easily see it coming a day when it explodes and you've got a need to do a whole standalone ordinance that would sit in a separate article. But there's a lot of planning and policy behind figuring out what to do with that.
In the setbacks, should the accessory structures also have to meet the required setbacks? Because don't they have sometimes little buildings and things?
They often have, buildings, small accessory buildings, so yeah.
For reference to planning commission or the city council or the governing body. And then A just references the city council and the city engineer. Are all of those references correct?
No, we've got all of the city council ones we've been going through and trying to switch to governing body, so those need to be corrected.
Like, and I guess my deeper question is,
Why both?
is that us or them on all of them, or is it just one or the other on any of them?
They design and color, I don't think the city council would determine that.
Well, if it's a CUP, you would see it first and make a recommendation, and then the governing body would take final action.
So city council should just-
So it kind of is both.
Well, it is, but.
It is just.
It is, but I don't know.
Yeah, and to some extent, it's sort of being redundant of the procedures. I mean, the procedures handle that anything that requires their approval, they can override by certain processes. So saying it doesn't make it any less true. I think it's more of just trying to communicate that. And it makes it, when you read it, it makes it a little confusing because it seems ambiguous. Well, who's requiring it?
We're good to say decision body.
Yeah.
Decision-making authority,
Yeah. But then you'd have to do.
which would technically be the governing body. Or you could just say it can be varied with approval.
Yeah. Should remove the.
Schedule 11-1, I know that's moving, but if it changes or doesn't, I mean, if it doesn't change, we should probably define C and A. I think I know what they are, but I didn't see a definition. And then on the wind energy conversion systems, number 2, no tower proposed shall be located as to ever be within 100 feet of any structure, but under 1B, we don't limit the height of them if they're done by a study. So what if the structure is taller than 100 feet? Is it still okay to only be 100 feet from the next adjacent structure?
Even if it falls.
Yeah, if it falls, it would hit something. If the wind piece is over 100 feet. Or do we need to limit the height in 1B to something like we do with the other towers?
Yeah, I think 1B was there because wind is the tough one. I mean, a lot of times it's not, the ordinance I've seen, some people in the industry go, well, you don't, it's so specific as to how high you need to be to capture the wind, you don't
Yeah.
know, because a lot of times you gotta get above the tree line, is the sad fact of it, so these things could, if you wanna do it, they could be huge. So I think that's why your current regulations in 1B don't really specify a height. I guess the other thing, since this is a conditional use, maybe 2 would be better. If the first thing I had said was, well, the 100 feet distance might be a pure separation of the facility so that there's not noise or sight impact, not necessarily related to the height of it for falling or safety. But since it's conditionally being reviewed, to me, it might make sense to make it more of a performance-based standard. That if you guys have assurances of structurally it's safe and you have assurances that, because a lot of times those towers will produce what they call like the flicker, you know, the light. So I don't know if that distance thing has something to do with that or even the noise of it as well, but we could look at making that more performance-oriented.
That makes sense.
In that same section, B3, on tip of any propeller or the wooden part shall be at least 10 feet above accessible pedestrian area. Is that 10 feet above what?
Above the sidewalk.
Wherever a person might be.
You think it's not
Outside of
that
the
tall, but
fence.
it.
Above the ground.
That's what I thought it meant.
So does that mean 10 feet above my head?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
No,
Above
it can't be above your head because my head's
Oh.
lower than your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Above the ground.
10 feet above the tallest person's head?
But still, I mean, if you're the really tall.
Is that what that
person,
means though? Is that,
Above
is that
the
saying?
ground.
We would
Right.
assume it to stay above the ground, to me. Cause like Brad said, it varies.
So 10 feet above grade in any accessible pedestrian area, does that make sense?
Really, that's not that tall.
It's not.
Is that tall enough? I guess it's
Yeah,
what-
Now, I wouldn't walk anywhere near it if it was coming out, you'd be like, what?
No.
But
And is the
What-
accessible pedestrian area intended to be if it, for some reason, extends over their fence line? So you got a fence around the base too, right?
yeah,
Do we have to have a fence around it? I mean, there's a lot of them that don't, right?
They usually have, well,
Not in big
they're in
ones.
rural areas.
I've never gotten close enough to them, they're really creepy.
They are.
I've
Wind
been right
farms
under
are
them.
really, really creepy because you hear nothing but kind of a little bit of hum and they're really big and they don't actually look like they're moving as fast as they are. They're odd.
Yeah, and I think this, I mean, again, I don't know whether they're practical or not, but we are seeing more people doing more, sometimes even for, either for the gimmick or the artistic effect, but the smaller scale ones are the ones that you're finding on sites more. And so that's where it might be more, they're not those big, huge turbines, they're things that just There's some that spin this way, there's some that have panels that rotate like this, and, the A.L. Huber one was some kind of thing that rotated like this.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be more practical to have some of these separation things. I don't think you know, the big huge propeller ones, like you said, those wind farms, they're looking for huge giant sites, and I don't think anyone's,
So did you
Probably
learn?
not really.
Depends on what land it
it's true, yeah.
is. And number 4 does require a fence,
I know, that's what I
the
just
first number 4.
wasn't sure if we needed that.
And that's the first time I've catch.
The first one, okay, good point.
So we're okay with that, 10 foot.
Well, I guess think about it this way, I mean, it kind of creeps me out too, but we'll see it anyways. So maybe we can always decide that this is a really heavily pedestrian traveled area, and you might have giants walking down that are 8 feet or on stilts. This is probably not a good.
Or kids on their shoulders.
Kids on shoulders, yeah. But I mean, I can go either way, I'm with you, Brad, it seems very, not tall enough, but we'll see it anyways. But do we want to make the standard a little taller, so we don't have to say, oh, send it back? We don't like it.
Did you say 15 feet? Or a little higher? Because even if you put 2 6 feet people on top of each other, you know, then.
You're probably not gonna stand on their shoulders.
Right. So it's over.
I think Kelly said something good too, you said, grade, right? You want to get a little more specific?
Yeah, instead of just make up a number that we feel comfortable with, maybe type something measurable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's, yeah, good suggestion.
Although are then we excluding maybe if they had one on a rooftop, and there was a rooftop patio, then it technically would be 15 feet above grade.
But it wouldn't, would it be over an accessible pedestrian area?
Well, if it was a rooftop restaurant or something, that's a,
Yeah, but it can't be any closer than 100 feet to the.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So then you have those rooftop ones and it can't be within 100 feet of this.
Well, it says no tower, well, or propeller, yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna change that one anyway.
but A says small wind energy systems not exceeding more than 50 feet or more than 15 feet above the roof, whichever is greater, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the one I added in, that one's not in your current standard, so that would be one that could be messing with the, wasn't anticipated when the others were written, so.
Yeah.
Doesn't that pretty much cover it then? I mean, 15 feet above the roof or whichever greater.
Yeah, and that's referring to the overall height of it,
Oh, the overall.
right,
Okay.
right.
I did have one more question on B9. Systems shall be minimum 5 rotors laid apart based upon the largest rotor in the area. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, again, that's an existing standard, I would suspect that it's,
Spacing.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
So
not-
rotor blade is say 10 feet long, then the next system would be 50 feet from that.
right.
Where do you move it up? Get the rotor or the center line of the?
Maybe it's 50 feet from all of those.
I guess thinking bigger picture, how does that impact what our goal is with this standard? Do we need that line item in there, or is that gonna be dictated by the people building the wind farm?
Outside of 7 feet.
it's a function of getting too much noise or vibration or flutter in one area.
Yeah, to me, I bet it's probably something just to manage the concentration of it, and that number was picked because there was some spacing. I don't.
Get to these residents.
Yeah, I was having an issue with it. As we're sitting here reading some more, I did have a question on B7. The safety results of the approved testing laboratory shall be submitted. Safety results of what?
What, yeah, what is
Is
that?
that like a UL listing of the overall
That particular
Device?
model, yeah.
or? Did we say that the wind harvesting equipment has to be listed by national
Industry
recognized
standard,
testing
yeah.
laboratory or something?
Was there a reason we didn't allow the small wind energy conversion systems in the RE district? I mean, some of those could be 5-acre lots.
That's true.
Right.
It's a conditional use permit meetings. Out of the city.
Well, if we shift this over to the use table as well, that they're not, you know,
There is a
they're
big
not
one.
married, and you can go, you can draw it anywhere you're comfortable among all of those districts, consider the small ones.
Feel comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do it.
While we're on the table, I wondered about the ground mounted solar in all the commercial districts. I don't see any reason why not to.
That's the reason we're not.
Trying to,
Probably more aesthetics would be my guess. Driving along in the commercial district and there's an empty lot with solar panels versus a building. Is that, are we okay with that or?
I guess I was picturing a small solar array that might have like 8 panels or something, you know, with a ground mount. Thinking that's not.
Would C3 dimensions that you need to be located in the rear yard, is that applicable? Yes. Maybe that's why it's commercial.
You would have to have a building, or else you wouldn't have your yard.
I don't have a yard, no, you're right.
So yeah, in that case, I suppose that.
That cover that one?
You know, the other thing we can do, because the use table is blending, so things that are designated as A, are accessories, so they're not, that you can't do it as a standalone use, so it has to be limited to another use, so, there's a little bit of overlap or gray area, because some of these things are just, they never accompany, they never sit as standalone things anyway. But this is one area where they can, in both cases, the wind and the solar. So if it, I guess we would have to, it could cause some confusion on how we're designating the use table, but my immediate thought was, well, we could do it as a conditional use, but only accessory to another use, and then we mark it with a C and an A. But then how many other instances in the use table have we not designated in that way, and that's how it's gonna work?
We've designated things as P and an A, I think.
I thought that was what the asterisk was.
No, asterisk sends you to additional standards.
So are you thinking that the ground mounted in the commercial districts would be accessory only? Or what would?
Probably in the, yeah,
I mean, we could do something where it's we could put it as an A, as an accessory with an asterisk, and then when you go to that chapter, you could say, in this district, while it's accessory, it still needs this UP.
Do they
I mean, it's
really
kind
need
of a,
conditional, do they really need to be conditional uses?
unless you want to limit the size or amount, which you could do with the standard. I mean, it's the whole idea of what are you wanting to review? What is the potential mitigation that you're trying to do through a CUP? And could you do that with standards?
Yeah, I don't really know if I think they need to be conditional. Unless they're maybe the principal use of the water.
Right, and that's where we could pull the A with the star, add some, couple standards to it.
Unless you think it's gonna interfere with someone's view and the neighbor won't be happy, something like that. This is only happening in commercial and industrial. Oh no, you've got them for residential too, so.
And with that, so this section goes talking about where we allow them, which is appropriate. If we allow them, then is it a correct assumption that before they install them, they have to go through the building permit process? So that all the structural review is under the building permit process?
Probably just, it depends on where they're put. If they're on the roof, it would be, more of a building permit, electrical permit. If they're just on the ground, probably strictly an electrical permit, so they would have to get some sort of permit.
Well, there's gonna be some kind of foundation too. Probably concrete.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the building code and how they do that, so potentially. But we wouldn't necessarily, if it's just a pad, that's not something you need a building permit for.
Well, if they're not building mounted, then I have less concern. When they become building mounted, in my regular life, as a fire protection guy, I have concerns. But if that's covered under that section, that's great.
And then maybe if it goes as an accessory use, with some conditions would be appropriate. If there's not a lot of concern.
Do you have a recommendation, Chris?
No, I know the roof mounted ones, there are provisions in the building code that address all of those things. So I think it might be redundant to state that here, that it has to meet that. With the ground mounted, I'm not as sure either, other than I know, we did work on a project where someone on the steering committee actually was saying, I power all my, he was kind of a tinkerer guy, he's like, I power all my home electronics by solar energy, and I was like, what do you mean? He built his own portable ground mounted one, and he's like, because we were talking with the city about doing the standards, and he was a planning commissioner, he goes, we don't need the standards, because I'm already doing it, and he had built a ground mounted thing, so that, I would be less certain of saying, what size, shape, how they're mounted, I mean, I think it could be all over the board on this.
Well, now you can just get rolls of them and you can roll them out. It's like a
Yeah.
rubber kind of, where you put it on the roof and it just, I mean, there's like nothing to them anymore.
Yeah.
I do know that the, building code guys are always saying if it's something like a canopy or something, it has to be able to withstand, what is it, 90 miles an hour of wind or
Yeah,
something like that.
there are some structural requirements of solar units, whether they're building mounted or ground mounted or pole mounted or whatever. So it's not at all, I think that the basic safety of it is going to be taken care of somehow, or just placement and the look and so forth. I also know that the use of solar power is kind of like the internet and the tower things, that power companies kind of have a set of rules and regulations that they use when they place them, and you really can't just outlaw them, they're an allowable use, so.
Other questions on Article 11? Sorry.
There's one other difficulty I was wondering about is, we're saying that they can't exceed a certain height for the ground mounted solar, and they have to have a certain setback, and some people are gonna probably say, well, my sun is only located here in this spot, and, and I have trees, and so it needs to be taller, and things like that, so. Maybe could we have some administrative flexibility if that's their only option in the yard, or?
Are they still ground mounted if they're above the trees?
Probably nobody's gonna put them above the trees, but it's just that the trees cast a shadow, so you wouldn't have to. I know you're,
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that maybe then that's not an option
I
for
was
you.
gonna say, maybe you just don't get to do that.
You don't get to do that.
If there's no sun in your yard.
let's just see how you guys are.
I don't have a garden because the only place to have one where there's sun is the middle of my yard.
I have too much, so I can't have nice plants in my front yard. Yeah.
Anything else on 11? So we covered 2, 6, and 11. That was the only discussion item on the agenda for this evening. I think our next meeting is regularly scheduled for.
Yep. Unless there was any other comments you had on anything we've already seen.
Not at this time, I don't know if anyone else is looking at this time. Alright, well, if we don't have anything else for this evening, I entertain a motion to adjourn. I make a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn made by Barbara with a second by Weimer. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries with all in favor. Meeting's adjourned.